Okay, so I have to figure out how JJ does this.
Hello!
Hello! Welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. I'm David, and I'm going to tell you a story. But first, I'm going to read the Bible, and then I'm going to tell you what didn't happen so that Kimberly can tell you what did happen. All right, so now that we've got all that out of the way, let me remind you that you need to hit the like button and hit the bell so that you never miss another video from the Heavy D Storytelling page. So you have to subscribe before you hit the bell. Okay, so I am being reminded as we speak of what I'm supposed to tell you. Okay, so this is Romans. Be the accomplice, and then Passepartout was talking to Fix, and he tripped on something. I'm not sure what it was, and they fell off the boat, and then Passepartout drowned, and that was the end of the story. Here's Kimberly to say how it really happened.
Oh no, Dad, don't you dare start that. So what actually happened was, sorry, I forget her name. Dad even...
Iota.
Yeah, it's a weird name in my opinion.
A-O... I can't remember how to spell it.
Iota. So Iota, her with had not been living in Hong Kong for 2 years at that point. So she went with Mr. Fogg and Passepartout to go around the world with them. And what happened was they went over they were going over to Hong Kong, but their transport was delayed. Both of them were. The one they were going on to Hong Kong and the one at Hong Kong. So they got there just in time with a day to spare before their train, the steamer, left. And on the steamer, Fix obviously followed them, and he's like, what on earth is going on? So, is Passepartout the accomplice or just a random servant? So he's contemplating telling Passepartout his theory that Fogg has stolen a bunch of money and is running off around the world. But at the same time, Passepartout, he's like, it's very suspicious. This guy, he was supposed to just leave us at Bombay, but here he is all the way at Hong Kong. I bet he is a spy from Mr. Fogg's club. The people who are, he's basically what he's thinking is Fix is the person that
the club hired to follow
him around to make sure that he gets everywhere without and on time and everything. Meanwhile, he's actually getting signatures in his passport. I'm going to hand it off to Dad, who's going to read
signatures.
us the story.
He's getting visas stamped in his passport. Hello, I'm back. I'm also front. Yes, okay, this is chapter 19. All right. Gosh, I can't see anything. This is chapter 19, in which Passepartout takes a too great interest in his master and what comes of it. Hong Kong is an island which came into the possession of the English by the Treaty of Nanking after the War of 1842, and the colonizing genius of the English has created upon it an important city and an excellent port. The island is situated at the mouth of the Canton River and is separated by about 60 miles from the Portuguese town of Macau on the opposite coast. Hong Kong has beaten Macau in the struggle for the Chinese trade, and now the greater part of the transportation of Chinese goods finds its depot at the former place. Docks, hospitals, wharves, a Gothic cathedral, a government house, macadamized streets, give to Hong Kong the appearance of a town in Kent or Surrey, transferred by some strange magic to the antipodes and the Far East. Passepartout wandered with his hands in his pockets toward the Victoria Port, gazing as he went at the curious palanquins and other modes of conveyance, and the groups of Chinese, Japanese, and Europeans who passed to and fro in the streets. Hong Kong seemed to him not unlike Bombay, Calcutta, and Singapore, since, like them, it betrayed everywhere the evidence of English supremacy. At the Victoria Port he found a confused mass of ships of all nations, English, French, American, and Dutch, men of war and trading vessels, Japanese and Chinese junks, sempas, tankas, and flower boats, which formed so many floating parterres. Passepartout noticed in a crowd a number of the natives who seemed very old and were dressed in yellow. On going into a barber's to get shaved, he learned that these ancient men were all at least 80 years old, at which age they are permitted to wear yellow, which is the imperial color. Passepartout, without exactly knowing why, thought this very funny. On reaching the quay where they were to embark on the Carnatic, he was not astonished to find Fix walking up and down. The detective seemed very much disturbed and disappointed. "This is bad," muttered Passepartout, "for the gentlemen of the Reform Club." He accosted Fix with a merry smile, as if he had not perceived that gentleman's chagrin. The detective had, indeed, good reasons to inveigh against the bad luck which pursued him. The warrant had not come. It was certainly on the way, but as certainly it would not now reach Hong Kong for several days, and this being the last English territory on Mr. Fogg's route, the robber would escape unless he could manage to detain him. "Well, Mr. Fix," said Passepartout, "have you decided to go with us so far as America?" "Yes," returned Fix, through his set teeth. "Good," exclaimed Passepartout, laughing heartily. "I knew you could not persuade yourself to separate from us. Come and engage your berth." They entered the steamer office and secured cabins for 4 persons. The clerk, as he gave them the tickets, informed them that, the repairs on the Carnatic having been completed, the steamer would leave that very evening, and not next morning, as had been announced. "That will suit my master all the better," said Passepartout. "I will go and let him know." Fix now decided to make a bold move. He resolved to tell Passepartout all. It seemed to be the only possible means of keeping Phileas Fogg several days longer at Hong Kong. He accordingly invited his companion into a tavern which caught his eye on the quay. On entering, they found themselves in a large room handsomely decorated, at the end of which was a large camp bed furnished with cushions. Several persons lay upon this bed in a deep sleep. At the small tables which were arranged about the room, some 30 customers were drinking English beer, porter, gin, and brandy, smoking the while long red clay pipes stuffed with little balls of opium mingled with essence of rose. From time to time one of the smokers, overcome with the narcotic, would slip under the table, whereupon the waiters, taking him by the head and feet, carried and laid him upon the bed. The bed already supported 20 of these stupefied sots. Fix and Passepartout saw that they were in the smoking-house, haunted by those wretched, cadaverous, idiotic creatures to whom the English merchants sell every year the miserable drug called opium to the amount of £1,400,000, thousands devoted to one of the most despicable vices which afflict humanity. The Chinese government has in vain attempted to deal with the evil by stringent laws. It passed gradually from the rich, to whom it was at first exclusively reserved, to the lower classes, and then its ravages could not be arrested. Opium is smoked everywhere, at all times, by men and women in the Celestial Empire, and once accustomed to it, the victims cannot dispense with it, except by suffering horrible bodily contortions and and agonies. A great smoker can smoke as many as 8 pipes a day, but he dies in 5 years. It was in one of these dens that Fix and Passepartout, in search of a friendly glass, found themselves. Passepartout had no money, but willingly accepted Fix's invitation in the hope of returning the obligation at some future time. They ordered 2 bottles of port, to which the Frenchman did ample justice, whilst Fix observed him with close attention. They chatted about the journey, and Passepartout was especially merry at the idea that Fix was going to continue it with them. When the bottles were empty, however, he rose to go and tell his master of the change in the time of the sailing of the Carnatic. Fix caught him by the arm and said, "Wait a moment." "What for, Monsieur Fix?" "I want to have a serious talk with you." "A serious talk?" cried Passepartout, drinking up a little wine that was left at the bottom of his glass. "Well, we'll talk about it tomorrow. I haven't the time now." "Stay. What I have to say concerns your master." Passepartout at this looked attentively at his companion. Fix's face seemed to have a singular expression. He resumed his seat. "What is it you have to say?" Fix placed his hand upon Passepartout's arm, and, lowering his voice, he said, "You have guessed who I am." "Parbleu!" said Passepartout, smiling. "Then I am going to tell you everything." "Now that I know everything, my friend, that's very good, but go on, go on. First, though, let me tell you that those gentlemen have put themselves to useless expense." "Useless?" said Fix. "You speak confidently. It's clear that you don't know how large the sum is." "Of course I do," returned Passepartout. 20,000 pounds. 55,000, answered Fix, pressing his companion's hand. "What?" "Sorry, that sounds more German, doesn't it?" "What?" cried the Frenchman. "Has Monsieur Fogg dared 50,000 pounds? Well, there's all the more reason for not losing an instant," he continued, getting up hastily. Fix pushed Passepartout back in his chair and resumed. 55,000 pounds. "And if I succeed, I get 2,000 pounds. If you'll help me, I'll let you have 500 of them." "Help you?" cried Passepartout, whose eyes were standing wide open. "Yes, help me keep Mr. Fogg here for 2 or 3 days." "Why, what are you saying? Those gentlemen are not satisfied with following my master and suspecting his honor, but they must try to put obstacles in his way. I blush for them." "What do you mean?" "I mean that it is a piece of shameful trickery. They might as well waylay Mr. Fogg and put his money in their pockets." "That's just what we count on doing." "It's a conspiracy, then," cried Passepartout, who became more and more excited as the liquor mounted in his head, for he drank without perceiving it. "A real conspiracy, and gentlemen too. Bah!" Fix began to be puzzled. "Members of the Reform Club," continued Passepartout, "you must know, Monsieur Fix, that my master is an honest man, and that, when he makes a wager, he tries to win it fairly." "But who do you think I am?" asked Fix, looking at him intently. "Parbleu! An ancient from the members of the Reform Club, sent out to here to interrupt my master's journey. But though I found you out some time ago, I've taken good care not to say about it to Monsieur Fogg." "He knows nothing, then?" "Nothing," replied Passepartout, again emptying his glass. The detective passed his hand across his forehead, hesitating before he spoke again. What should he do? Passepartout's mistake seemed sincere, but it made his design more difficult. It was evident that the servant was not the master's accomplice, as Fix had been inclined to suspect. "Well," said the detective to himself, "as he is not an accomplice, he will help me." He had no time to lose. Fogg must be detained at Hong Kong so as So he resolved to make a clean breast of it. "Listen to me," said Fix abruptly. "I am not, as you think, an agent of the members of the Reform Club." "Bah!" retorted Passepartout with an air of raillery. "I am a police detective, sent out here by the London office." "You a detective?" "I will prove it. Here is my commission." Passepartout was speechless with astonishment when Fix displayed this document. The genuineness of it could not be doubted. Mr. Fogg's wager," resumed Fix, "is only a pretext of which you and the gentlemen of the Reform are dupes. He had a motive for securing your innocent complicity." "But why?" "Listen. On the 28th of last September, a robber of £55,000 was committed at the Bank of England by a person whose description was fortunately secured. Here is his description. It answers exactly to that of Phileas Fogg." "What nonsense!" cried Passepartout, striking the table with his fist. "My master is a most honorable of men." "How can you tell? You know scarcely anything about him. You went into his service the day he came away, and he came away on a foolish pretext, without trunks, and carrying a large amount in banknotes. And yet you are bold enough to assert that he is an honest man." "Yes, yes," repeated the poor fellow mechanically. "Would you like to be arrested as his accomplice?" Passepartout, overcome by what he had heard, held his head between his hands and did not dare to look at the detective. Phileas Fogg, the savior of Aouda, that brave and generous man, a robber? And yet how many presumptions there were against him! Passepartout essayed to reject the suspicions which forced themselves upon his mind. He did not wish to believe that his master was guilty. "Well, what do you want of me?" said he at last with an effort. "See here," replied Fix. "I have tracked Mr. Fogg to this place, but as yet I have failed to receive the warrant of arrest for which I sent to London. You must help me to keep him here in Hong Kong." "I? But I?" "I will share with you the £2,000 reward offered by the Bank of England." "Never!" replied Passepartout, who tried to rise, but fell back exhausted in mind and body. "Monsieur Fix," he stammered, "even should what you say be true, if my master is really the robber you are seeking for, which I deny, I am in his service. I have seen his generosity and goodness, and I will never betray him, not for all the gold in the world. I come from a village where they don't eat that kind of bread." "You refuse?" "I refuse." "Consider that I've said nothing," said Fix, "and let us drink." "Yes, let us drink." Passepartout felt himself yielding more and more to the effects of the liquor. Fix, seeing that he must at all hazards be separated from his master, wished to entirely overcome him. Some pipes full of opium lay upon the table. Fix slipped one into Passepartout's hand. He took it, put it between his lips, lit it, drew several puffs, and his head, becoming heavy under the influence of the narcotic, fell upon the table. "At last," said Fix, seeing Passepartout unconscious, "Mr. Fogg will not be informed of the Carnatic's departure, and if he is, he will have to go on without this cursed Frenchman." And after paying his bill, Fix left the tavern. What a jerk. Okay. No, he's just unconscious from the drug. All right.
He's now going to be dependent on it.
So, well, I don't know if one time makes you dependent on it, but anyway. All right. Chapter 20, in which Fix comes face to face with Phileas Fogg. While these events were passing in the opium house, Mr. Fogg, unconscious of the danger he was in of losing the steamer, was quietly escorting Aouda about the streets of the English quarter, making the necessary purchases for the long voyage before them. It was all very well for an Englishman like Mr. Fogg to make the tour of the world with a carpet-bag. A lady could not be expected to travel comfortably under such conditions. He acquitted his task with characteristic serenity, and invariably replied to the remonstrances of his fair companion, who was confused by his patience and generosity. It is in the interest of my journey, a part of my program. The purchases made, they returned to the hotel, where they dined at a sumptuously served table d'hôte, after which Aouda, shaking hands with her protector after the English fashion, retired to her room for rest. Mr. Fogg absorbed himself throughout the evening in the perusal of the Times and Illustrated London News. Had he been capable of being astonished at anything, it would have been not to see his servant return at bedtime. But knowing that the steamer was not to leave for Yokohama until the next morning, he did not disturb himself about the matter. When Passepartout did not appear the next morning to answer his master's bell, Mr. Fogg, not betraying the least vexation, contented himself with taking his carpet-bag, calling Aouda, and sending for a palanquin. It was then 8 o'clock. At 9:30, it being then high tide, the Carnatic would leave the harbour. Mr. Fogg and Aouda got into the palanquin, their luggage being brought after on a wheelbarrow, and half an hour later stepped upon the quay whence they were to embark. Mr. Fogg then learned that the Carnatic had sailed the evening before. He had expected to find not only the steamer but his domestic, and was forced to give up both. But no sign of disappointment appeared on his face, and he merely remarked to Aouda, "It is an accident, madam, nothing more." At this moment, a man who had been observing him attentively approached. It was Fix, who, bowing, addressed Mr. Fogg. "Were you not, like me, sir, a passenger on the Rangoon, which arrived yesterday, sir?" "I was, sir," replied Mr. Fogg coldly, "but I have not the honour—" "Pardon me, I thought I should find your servant here." "Do you know where he is, sir?" asked Aouda anxiously. "What?" responded Fix, feigning surprise. "Is he not with you?" "No," said Aouda. "He has not made his appearance since yesterday. Could he have gone on board the Carnatic without us?" "Without you, madam?" answered the detective. "Excuse me, did you intend to sail in the Carnatic?" "Yes, sir." "So did I, madam, and I am excessively disappointed. The Carnatic, its repairs being completed, left Hong Kong 12 hours before the stated time, without any notice being given, and we must now wait a week for another steamer." As he said a week, Fix felt his heart leap for joy. Fogg detained at Hong Kong for a week. There would be time for the warrant to arrive, and fortune at last favored the representative of the law. His horror may be imagined when he heard Mr. Fogg say in his placid voice, "But there are other vessels besides the Carnatic, it seems to me, in the harbour of Hong Kong." And offering his arm to Aouda, he directed his steps toward the docks in search of some craft about to start. Fix, stupefied, followed. It seemed as if he were attached to Mr. Fogg by an invisible thread. Chance, however, appeared really to have abandoned the man it had hitherto served so well. For 3 hours Phileas Fogg wandered about the docks with the determination, if necessary, to charter a vessel to carry him to Yokohama, but he could only find vessels which were loading or unloading, and which could not therefore set sail. Fix began to hope again. But Mr. Fogg, far from being discouraged, was continuing his search, resolved not to stop if he had to resort to Macao, when he was accosted by a sailor on one of the wharves. "Is your honour looking for a boat?" "Have you a boat ready to sail?" "Yes, your honour, a pilot boat, number 43, the best in the harbour." "Does she go fast?" "Between 8 and 9 knots the hour." "Will you look at her?" "Yes." "Your honour will be satisfied with her. It is for a sea excursion?" "No, for a voyage." "A voyage?" "Yes. Will you agree to take me to Yokohama?" The sailor leaned on the railing, opened his eyes wide, and said, Is your honor joking? No, I have missed the Carnatic, and I must get to Yokohama by the 14th at the latest to take the boat for San Francisco. I am sorry, said the sailor, but it is impossible. I offer you £100 per day and an additional reward of £200 if I reach Yokohama in time. Are you in earnest? Very much so. The pilot walked away a little distance and gazed out to sea, evidently struggling between the anxiety to gain a large sum and fear of venturing so far. Fix was in mortal suspense. Mr. Fogg turned to Aouda and asked her, You would not be afraid, would you, madam? Not with you, Mr. Fogg, was her answer. The pilot now returned, shuffling his hat in his hands. Well, pilot, said Mr. Fogg. Well, your honor, said he, I could not risk myself, my men, or my little boat of her shining copper sheathing, her galvanized ironwork, her deck white as ivory, betrayed the pride taken by John Bunsby in making her presentable. Her two masts leaned a trifle backward. She carried brigantine, foresail, storm jib, and standing jib, and was well rigged for running before the wind, and she seemed capable of brisk speed, which indeed she had already proved by gaining several prizes in pilot-boat races. The crew of the Tankadere was composed of John Bunsby, the master, and 4 hardy mariners who were familiar with the Chinese seas. John Bunsby himself, a man of 45 or thereabouts, vigorous, sunburnt, with a sprightly expression of the eye, an energetic and self-reliant countenance, would have inspired confidence in the most timid. Phileas Fogg and Aouda went on board, where they found Fix already installed. Below deck was a square cabin, of which the walls bulged out in the form of cots above the circular divan. In the center was a table provided with a swinging lamp. The accommodation was confined but neat. I am sorry to have nothing better to offer you, said Mr. Fogg to Fix, who bowed without responding. The detective had a feeling akin to humiliation in profiting by the kindness of Mr. Fogg. It's certain, thought he, that though rascal as he is a polite one. The sails and the English flag were hoisted at 10 minutes past 3. Mr. Fogg and Aouda, who were seated on deck, cast a last glance at the quay in hope of espying Passepartout. Fix was not without his fears lest chance should direct the steps of the unfortunate servant whom he had so badly treated in this direction, in which case the explanation, the reverse of satisfactory to the detective, must have ensued. But the Frenchman did not appear, and without doubt was still lying under the stupefying influence of the opium. John Bunsby, master, at length gave the order to start, and the Tankadere, taking the wind under her brigantine, foresail, and standing jib, bounded briskly forward over the waves. And tomorrow we will read chapter 21, in which the master of the Tankadere runs a great risk of losing a reward of £200. And that is the end of what we're reading. The first word is this. I hope you're enjoying this story, and we will hopefully join up again tomorrow. Sorry, we have taken a couple of days off because we've had some things that we've been doing, and so I hope that you're enjoying the story. God bless you. Have a great night. We will see you again tomorrow.